the Velvet Revolution of 1989. Czechoslovakia divided into the Czech Republic and Slovakia. The Czechs are now seen as a model EU democracy, while the Slovaks are on the EU naughty step. What has been the Slovakian journey from that time? And is Robert Fico the model of a new European politician? Join me, Jan Daraš, for How We Got Here.
It's been a difficult week for Slovakia's Russia-friendly Prime Minister Robert Fico. On Tuesday, he not only received his equally Eurosceptic Hungarian counterpart, but also survived an opposition attempt at a no-confidence vote. Infuriated by an attempt of holding the session partly behind closed doors, the opposition walked out of the parliamentary debate. Still in the chamber, an unphased Fico read out a report composed by Slovakia's secret service on an organized long-term operation aimed at destabilizing the country. On Thursday, PM Fico headed ex officio a Security Council session that discussed Slovakia's security, and the conclusions were revolutionary. Allegedly, there are malicious structures operating in Slovakia with the goal to escalate tensions in society via street protests. According to PM Fico, the said groups are financed from abroad.
It is an attack on the constitutional setup of the Slovak Republic. It is an attempt to organize a normal coup in Slovakia so that the government falls and those who cannot get into power through democratic parliamentary elections come to power.
The Secret Service report and PM Fico's statement come as the Prime Minister finds himself under accusations from the opposition, which fears that he intended to take Slovakia out of the European Union. Tibor Gašpar, now Deputy Speaker of Slovakia's Parliament and former head of the Slovakian police force during the tenure of Smer SD under Prime Minister Robert Fico, does not rule out this scenario.
The door must remain open for a situation in which we could possibly consider even such an extreme solution as a withdrawal from the EU.
Being a populist, PM Fico has been striking nationalist chords similar to the ones that played in the lead-up to the Czechoslovakia split of 1992 and in the first years of Slovakia's independence. While we're at it, let's take a trip back in time to take a closer look at Slovakia's post-1992 political dynamics. Seeking greater political influence and improvement on their economic standing, Slovaks parted ways with the Czechs in a peaceful dissolution of Czechoslovakia on December 31st, 1992. Up until 1998, Slovakia experienced a period of nationalism under Vladimir Mečiar and his Slovak National Party. Although Mečiar himself supported Slovakia's EU and NATO ambitions and submitted his country's applications to both organizations, his government, which was in power from 1994 to 1998, was characterized by authoritarian tendencies and a nationalist, populist approach to governance. Because of autocratic undertones of his rule, the undermining of democratic institutions and political freedoms, Slovakia's membership in the EU and NATO was stalled. The 1998 elections brought about a shift toward European integration. A reformist coalition led by Mikuláš Dzurinda from the Slovak Democratic and Christian Union emerged on top. His government, ruling Slovakia from 1998 to 2006, made pursuing membership in NATO and the EU central to Slovakia's foreign policy. Having liberalized the economy, strengthened the rule of law, improved the execution of human rights, Slovakia under Dzurinda's leadership joined the EU in 2004, along with 9 other countries from Central and Eastern Europe, including Poland. Slovakia also became a member of NATO in 2004, cementing its integration into Western institutions. Today, Slovakia's populist leadership and its electorate express even more vitriolic sentiments towards the EU. Fico's appearance, side to side with Russian leader Vladimir Putin, and the latter's anointment of Fico-managed Slovakia for a potential peace summit with Ukraine, shows that Bratislava sticks with Moscow rather than Brussels.
I'm delighted to be joined today by Marcin Zaborowski. He's our Europe editor here at TVP World and a former director of the Polish Institute of International Affairs. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you for having me.
Can you take us through, in outline form, the split of Czechoslovakia in 1989? It came together firstly in 1918, then it was split again during the Second World War, before the Second World War, came together after the Second World War. Why were these two countries joined, and why did they have this kind of velvet revolution, a split, territorial split without bloodshed?
Well, the formation of Czechoslovakia, the historical formation of Czechoslovakia, was always a little bit of an artificial creation. That was because, you know, the two nations, Czechs and Slovaks, have quite different traditions, and actually the languages are more different than people realize they are. Slovak is much closer to Polish than the Czech languages. It's they have different pasts, with Czechs being dominated in the Austro-Hungarian Empire by the Austrians and having their tradition, their legal tradition, and their culture very much shaped by this kind of a being part of a German-speaking empire. And Czechs very often refer to themselves as they are Czech-speaking Germans. Yeah? So, and some of them can be quite anti-German, but they have this belief in order, they have this belief in rules, and they're quite secular too, they're quite modern, they went through Industrial Revolution and so on. Slovaks at the same time had 1,000 years of domination by the Hungarians. And being dominated by the Hungarians is a little bit different than being dominated by Austrians in the context of that empire. It was mostly a peasant society, with landowners being Hungarian.
Yeah.
And therefore, Slovaks nurtured the kind of a nationhood and Slovak language in the context of a deep mistrust of state structures, yeah, and any kind of international influences.
So foreign state structures, their own domestic state structures?
They have always obviously deep dislike of the Hungarians. That's a natural thing, but they also never particularly trust in the West. They never particularly also, they have decent relationship with the Czechs now, but there's this kind of a relationship where they think that the Czechs were thought of themselves as this kind of an older brother, a patronizing one.
Yeah. And how did this influence the policies after 1989 and as going up to the accession to the EU? Both are members now. The Czech Republic seems to be a model new member, if we can call it that, and Slovakia has a very critical attitude. Is that just a factor from the current Prime Minister, Robert Fico, or has this been present in their outlook on the European Union? Like you say, they're distrustful of the state institutions.
Well, this is the recent incarnation of Robert Fico. He was Prime Minister before. It is his fourth time when he is in the office. And formerly when he was holding the office in the past, he was an anti-European. It's a new thing that he is right now. And that's still within the number of caveats. When we look into the public opinion, actually the Slovak public opinion is still more pro-European than the Czech public opinion. So Czechs are good citizens of the EU, but at the same time there is this strong undercurrent of Czech skepticism towards the EU, which is not that different from the British attitude towards the EU. Whereas for Slovaks, the Slovak society sees the EU as a vehicle for civilizational advancement. And it's still popular. According to Globsec trends, I think 70% of Slovaks are still very much in favor of the EU, and they support the EU membership. But let's also remember that Slovaks are Eurozone members, as opposed to Czechs. So to some extent, they're actually more integrated within the European mainstream than the Czechs are themselves.
So how do you account for this stage in the journey of the current Prime Minister, Robert Fico? You mentioned that he started off as a pro-European and now he's highly Eurosceptic.
It's quite personal. Robert Fico, when he was removed from the office following the murder of a journalist Kuciak, who was murdered by basically Italian mobsters with some links to state services, and these state services had links to people very close to Fico. So he was removed from the office, and in the following years he was very close from being imprisoned, and that makes him more radical. He became more mistrustful, more radical, more populist. And then he was essentially turning, whilst being in opposition, he was a strong critic of vaccination, for example, COVID vaccination. He was very strong critic of sanctions on Russia. He started to move towards more radical positions.
So which policies, the populist policies that he's picking and choosing, which chime in with the Slovakian electorate's outlook?
Well,
you mentioned that they were pro-European and he's anti. So is he going against the grain there?
Well, it does not necessarily translate one thing into another. Mm-hmm. You can still have pro-European population, but have fairly Eurosceptic government, and his government is still Eurosceptic with some caveats and measures. They are still being cautious. They don't come out in Brussels and vote against sanctions. So far they haven't done it, for example. So far it's like a talk for domestic consumption, one might say. But then when they go to Brussels, they actually behave. And we're not sure whether it's going to continue, but if there is no critical mass going against sanctions, I don't think that Fico would do that. He's still very cautious. So the thing here is domestic consumption, what you do for the voters, and the other thing important to bear in mind is that this is a very insular society, very much focused on itself and being mistrustful of for example, interventionist policies of the EU or NATO. So 40% of Slovaks are mistrustful of liberal democracy and are mistrustful and are blaming the West and Ukrainian refugees for their misfortunes.
I mean, being mistrustful of the West is quite it's not necessarily a crazy position to adopt, isn't it? It happens in all countries. We're critical of many institutions, your supranational institutions. What are the particularly Ukrainian factors that motivate the Slovakian electorate? He's stopped military aid, at least, to Ukraine. Why is that? Is that because of the Russian oil coming through or the Russian gas coming through into their countries?
Well, Slovakia is directly dependent on the supplies of the Russian gas and oil, which was coming through the territory of Ukraine. And as we know, a couple of months back, Ukrainians decided to end the transit deal. So this gas and oil no longer flows into Slovakia from that pipeline. So the consequence of that is that Slovakia will have to pay more, and Slovaks will have to pay more for gas and oil and so on. Prices will go up, and Fico finds a scapegoat, and that scapegoat is Ukrainians and the Ukrainian government.
Yeah.
But of course, people will notice that prices are going up, and they need a scapegoat, but first thing they will turn against Fico, of course.
Yes, he'll need to deflect the protests which are happening. What are the how difficult is Robert Fico? Is he modelling himself on Viktor Orban, for example, policies, or is he forming a specifically Slovakian character to his premiership? Is it too simplistic to compare the two?
It's a complicated thing, but I mean, in a nutshell, yes. Yeah. In a nutshell, we might say that Robert Fico sees himself as a Slovak Viktor Orban, which is very interesting because he has in the coalition, because he governs in coalition, so he governs with a national party, which is anti-Hungarian. But he still gets on very well with Viktor Orban. And also his own political origins, he's a former young communist.
Yes, that's where he began his career, isn't it?
And his party is meant to be populist left-wing rather than right-wing. But, you know, when it comes to these left or right labels, they're less important now these days than a label that this is a mainstream liberal democratic party or a populist party. And at the end of the day, Smer is very much just a populist party.
A final question to you, Marcin. Is this a portent of how European politics will change? You mentioned that left and right labels are obsolete almost. How do you see politics in Eastern Europe particularly change? AfD in Germany, of course, Viktor Orban, Robert Fico. How do you see the alliances, the political alliances that electorates have to make, shaping our politics?
Well, I'm pretty sure that Robert Fico would like to be a part of a populist international alliance, which is interesting because populists are also nationalists,
yeah.
And nationalists by definition don't like to cooperate with each other. But yes, I mean, he sees himself in the same league as Salvini in Italy, more radical than Meloni. He sees himself as in the same league with Spanish Vox, with Viktor Orban in the region, or with our AUR in Romania. Poland is a different kettle of fish, so let's don't touch it for now. But yes, they were all banking on the big push for populists with Trump coming to power. But now it looks like that Trump coming to power may actually be hard on Russia, because Trump said very recently that actually,
yes,
if Russians don't come to the table, we'll sanction them.
Yes.
And for months, both Fico and Orban were saying we need to drop sanctions against Russia.
Fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for dropping into the programme, Marcin Zaborowski.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for today. Stay tuned with us as usual. I hope you know this time by now. Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 2:15 p.m. CET. Thank you. Join us soon.